guys, welcome back again, back to my studio. Hope you all are doing well, as always. And I wanted to come today to show you, I like to keep a supply of my own collage paper. So I wanted to show you how I do that, so in case you want to keep your own. As you know, you can buy tons of collage paper. You can use scrapbooking paper, there's plenty of things to buy, but I found that as I've gotten farther and farther into my art practice, I'd prefer to have ones that are my own. And sometimes I have an idea in my head and I want to capture that and make my own little pattern. So I'm going to show you some basic ones today. But first, to start with, this is the paper I use most often. It doesn't matter the brand, but it's a newsprint pad. The reason I like it is because it's fairly thin. It's a 30 pound, so that's fairly thin. If you can find something in the 20 to 30 pound, I think that works the best for collage. It also works better if it's something that doesn't have a shiny coating on it. It seems like anything that's shiny, when you go to glue it down with matte medium or glue stick or anything like that, it'll tend to buckle. Whereas if it's a matte finish or an unfinished, like this newsprint is completely unfinished, it does glue down a lot easier and you don't have to work so hard to get it smooth. So that's why I prefer to use something like this. And the newsprint's really cheap, so that's another reason I like using it. So I don't feel like I'm ever wasting, like, really good, like, onion skin paper or something that I paid, $2 a sheet for. So, so that's what I use to make my patterns, my collage paper. And then when I sit down to work, I usually like to have a variety of brushes, both different sizes and different shapes. And I usually pick 3 or 4 because each one's going to make a slightly different. One I don't have readily handy, I think, that I use a lot are those little foam brushes you can buy at Michael's or at the hardware store. They're the foam ones that have the little stick. You know what I'm talking about. They're foam brushes. They're black. Those you can make a ton of pattern with. I wonder if I see an old one. Hold on. I'm going to reach. That's what I'm talking about. So these you can make a lot of patterns with, so I'll leave this one out too because I want to show you. But so just have a variety of brushes so that you can make some different marks. And then what do I use? I typically use either an acrylic ink, India ink, or I'll use, this is one of my favorites, this is Golden. It's a high flow acrylic, so it is already a very liquidy. This used to be called airbrush, so that's how thin it is. This is the one I prefer to use, but if for some reason I didn't have this, I would grab some acrylic ink and use that. If you don't have either one of those, you can use your normal heavy bodied paint. This one just happens to be Dina Wakley, but any heavy body paint. And then you can mix it with water. The only thing I find though is if it's a very thick heavy body paint, you're going to have to add a lot of water, and then sometimes the pigment separates because paint isn't meant to be mixed with more than like 30% water, or it'll start breaking down. So one way to get around that is to take your acrylic paint, and then if you have any fluid matte medium, use that instead of water or in addition to water to help get the right consistency. Or Golden has a couple products that you can buy. One is their airbrush medium, which is essentially the medium that's in here. So this high flow paint is pigment plus airbrush medium. Or Golden also makes a glazing medium that is not quite as fluid. I would say the airbrush medium sounds like water. This has a little bit of body to it, but it'll make things a little more transparent. It does make the paint take a little longer to dry, but it gives it that little bit of transparency, and it'll make it a little more fluid while you're working. So I would recommend either these two or your Fluid Matte Medium to water down your paint if you're using heavy body. Now, if you have some of the paints from the craft store, like at Michael's, say the Folk Art or Apple Barrel, I think is another brand that they have there. Those are pretty fluid already. I would probably add just a tiny bit of water to them just to thin them out, because you do want them to be more like an ink. I find it just, it makes it easier, and then you don't end up with a lot of thickness to your paint, because you're trying to imitate a collage paper that you would buy, and that wouldn't have any texture on it. So I'm trying to get something that I can put down and doesn't leave any texture. So, and how I work is I leave everything in this book, so then as I want to use it, I can just come through and tear off a piece. And you'll see some of the pages aren't even mark making, it's just extra paint I had, or I was cleaning off a brayer. And I have a couple of these now, and the other ones are torn to bits, so I pulled out the pretty one. So let's go ahead. I'm going to use my High Flow. The High Flow does have a little ball in there that helps mix it up, because the pigment and the medium will try to separate. And then I'm just going to put a little bit out on my palette. And then I'm going to start with this round, which is a number 12. It's a pretty big round. I do like to have, I don't like to start with a dry brush when I do this. So I'm just going to get a little bit of water on my brush just to get it a little more pliable. But then there's no right or wrong. I like to hold my brush really loose, so I tend to hold it up here. And usually one of the easiest things for me to start with is a circle, or whatever the shape might be. It's more like a squoval, but I just say it's a lot easier to lighten up if you can just make a whole page. And I'm never going to take like this whole page out and use the whole thing, but you can imagine if I just tear off a little piece there and I add that in to an art journal page or something, it'd be pretty interesting. Here's the other reason I like to use a fluid paint or an ink and this uncoated paper. It's like essentially dry already, so I can just flip and go to the next page. Now sometimes you'll see it's coming through the background, but it never got onto the other page. If it did, I wouldn't really care, because again, that's just another, let me go ahead and change brushes so I can show you. So now I'm changing, this is a 3/4 inch, this is a Dina Wakley flat brush. This time I'm going to hold it a little closer, but I'm still working pretty loosely. One secret I'll give you if you want to work loosely and you struggle with it is don't let your elbow rest on the table. So I'm drawing like this. I have my elbow lifted up, and then it's a lot easier to be loose, or maybe not easier. You don't really have any choice. And to me, that one is done too. I'm going to show you how I come back. I do add a glaze to some of these pages, but I'm just going to get the main designs down first. So this is a 3/4 inch filbert. So if you see at the end there, the brushes, it's almost like somebody took thinning shears like your hairdresser would use and trimmed it. So it's not a sharp point, and it's a little rounded at the end, like a half oval. I like how this brush creates kind of these interesting, kind of a scallop shape. I'm pretty sure this brush wasn't invented for this. I'm sure it was like for a landscape painter to make grass or something, or to make feathers and fur on animals. But to me, that's a cool mark. And you'll find that, so there I'm just kind of dabbing, but you can use the same brush and create a whole different look with it. Change your direction. So you don't have to create one sheet of all the same thing. And sometimes I'll even overlay my patterns, because again, that makes it a little more interesting to look at. But you can see, you could just sit in your studio and you could crank out quite a few of these pages while you're watching Netflix or something. Let's see if this will, I've never done any circle shapes with these. Oh, I like that. It kind of reminds me of the rings of a tree. Alright, I like the smaller one better. So the other thing is, if you're learning about your brushes, there's all different ways you can use the same brush to get a different mark, just by changing your pressure, changing the angle, changing where you hold it. So if I hold this brush way down here, number one, I can't do those little swirly marks, but I get a much tighter circle. Whereas if I hold it way up here, I have a lot less control and I get a different look. So this is a great way just to, especially if you've gotten a new brush because you went shopping and you're like, oh, well, that brush looks really cool. That's how I got this brush. I was at Whimsidoodle one day and I was like, oh, that's a cool brush. Of course, I am self-trained. I don't like the word self-trained, self-taught, because I didn't just like teach myself this stuff. But I never went to school for it. Many of you know I went to school for accounting, which doesn't seem like such use anymore. I always say my accounting degree got me my husband, because he is an accountant. But unrelated to that, so I don't know what all of these art tools do. So a lot of times I buy stuff and I just bring it home and I try it out. So that's why if you're in a workshop with me, I will tell you, buy this, but don't read the instructions, because I very rarely am actually using something the way it's meant to be. Because I don't read the instructions when I buy something, because that seems boring. Sometimes I will go, like after I've had something for a while, I'll watch a YouTube video and realize, oh, that's what that's meant for. Good example of that is clear tar gel that Golden makes. I have only ever used it when I just created this one. So those of you on Instagram have already seen it. These are all the tops off of the paint tubes, and so I glued them down, but then I pour clear tar gel over it. So this is the same as my button journal. But this is not what clear tar gel is meant for. Clear tar gel is a medium that you can either make acrylic skins with, you can do image transfers with, and I found out, here's in case you're wondering what I'm talking about, it's a golden medium and it's called clear tar gel, which would make me think tar means black, but it's not. So this wasn't meant to be a product that was ever sold. When I went to one of the Golden demos, he was telling us that this product was made just for the movie about Jackson Pollock, because as he was painting in the movie, he wanted to have his paint flinging. So when they mixed the paint with this medium, you would get these long drips of paint. So it was only meant to be used in the movie, but then the artists that were on staff at Golden loved it, and so that's why they started making it. And so now we have it. And now I use it to coat stuff on the front of my journals. Maybe one day I'll actually use it for, I still have about 1/3 of a jar, so maybe one day I'll actually use it for its intended purpose. Alright, so now I'm going to use the little cheapy foam brush. These are usually like 25 or 50 cents. I mean, you can get packs of them. So the obvious one is the little tip at the end. Now remember, this is a used one that I've washed, so the tip is not as sharp as if you had a new one. But again, that's somewhat interesting. And I may come and overlay and create that kind of pattern. This tends to be one of my things I like to do, is a little cross hatching. So that's the end. Now if you look at the side, it kind of looks like a triangle. So I like to use that too. I really wish I had a sharp one. Let me try a little bit more paint, see if I can get a better image for you. There. So those little triangles are like a, almost looks like a little house shape. So again, I'm just dabbing. And then, of course, you have this big flat side. You can create marks there. And then, I'm not going to do it because I don't want to get ink all over my hands, but you can tell I've used this end. Well, I'll do it. Really. Who cares about getting paint on my hands? So you get your dots. So those are all just slightly dabbing on the page. Now if we come back to this line that's on the top, if I put it down and drag it, now I get more of a shape like that first brush that I used. If I come to the triangle and drag it, I'm getting a different shape. And then obviously this bigger part gives you a different shape there. So, and that's all from that one little brush. And I know there's more. You could fully use this side, you could fully use that side. One you can do if you're using the edge, the top edge, and then you pull down. Let me flip. Let's flip to another page. So see, it came through because that part was really wet, but I don't care. So it'll create these kind of abstract lines. And again, not everything has to be a solid. I kind of like when the paint starts to run out and I get some variation. Because again, if I'm cutting out a piece of this, I kind of want it to look handmade. I mean, if I wanted something perfect, I would buy something from the store. So that's the foam brush, and then I have this little tiny brush. This one I'm going to do, sometimes I like to do I think it's asemic writing. The type of writing that has a meaning in your head, but you can't actually read it. So sometimes I just like to do that. And you can do it big. You can... I have certain letters. I love how L's look. I love how G's look. So that's not a particular word. So you can do it large. If I hold down on the brush a little more, I can work a little smaller. And if you had an even smaller brush, you could work smaller. You could do this with a pen or a marker. Just make sure that it's something that is not water soluble, because if you're going to glue it down, you don't want to have to worry about your collage getting ruined. Sometimes I'll even write it backwards. So, to me, that's cool. And then there's an artist I've seen on Instagram. She does this writing. I don't know if it is actually Chinese or Japanese. It may be. I do not know Chinese or Japanese. But I have an idea of what letters look like. If you can read Japanese or Chinese and I write a really bad word, just know I didn't mean to. But I just love how some of the letters look. And I may even, I don't think these are even letters. Let's call them abstract shapes. But I just, to me, this is another thing that I would use in my collages. I think some of them are starting to look like hieroglyphs. Oh, look here. This one's Hangman. I may have to look through my son's. My son has a couple books about ancient Egypt. I'll have to look at some hieroglyphs and see if I could copy those. So, again, these aren't real letters. I just, to me, that's appealing. I like how that looks. So those are some ideas I use. I mean, and you saw how quickly I got through, I don't know, 6 or 7 pages? 8 pages. And now I have those in here just waiting for me. So when I want to collage something, I can just come through and be like, oh, I wanted some lines. But these are great. Sometimes I leave them like this. But another thing I like to do is add a glaze on top of them. So they have a tiny bit of color, but not a huge amount. So for that, I am going to pull out my jelly plate. I just had a small avalanche on my studio table. There's a pile over there in the corner. I know this looks very neat. What you can't see is that on either side it looks like a hoarder lives here, and there's just piles and piles of stuff. So that's my secret. I've told you many times that I have a small studio, very small. But I'm happy to have a studio at all and not be at a dining room table. Oh, look, there's some paint. Alright, let's use the other side. I've been saving this side. Look how pretty this side is. Oh, but look, it came off. Okay, so I get to keep that part of it. This was from a retreat that I did. And I liked it so much that I flipped it over and I started using the other side because I liked this was so pretty. So to do a glaze, I usually like to use a metallic, and the ones I actually like to use are Martha Stewart's paints that they sell at Michael's. But I am either out of them or I can't find them. Let's just say I'm out of them. So I'm going to use, I have this, it's Blick Matte Acrylic in Burnished Copper. This is a little thicker. The reason I like Martha Stewart's is because they're very thin and transparent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some of this airbrush medium to it, because that'll thin it out and make it a little more transparent. And then I'm just going to use my brayer. The medium is very fluid, so you have to kind of work it into the paint first. So just work slowly, because you will end up splashing it all over you. Now we're not going to print directly off of the gel plate. I just like to use the gel plate as my palette. So I'm just going to slide that over, see if I can get everything in the screen. So I have some on my brayer mixed with the medium, and I'm just going to run it down. So sometimes if I think, okay, all I am seeing now are the Flintstones. Any 70s, 80s children who grew up watching the Flintstones every afternoon. I don't know, I'm pretty sure Betty Rubble wore this at one point. But, so again, I don't like to add perfect color. I don't want it all over, but that adds a little hint of something. So again, when I pull out a section, it makes it a little more interesting. That one, I just like the way it is. Let's see which one. Let's do this one, because it's kind of plain. And then some of the other paints I like to use, and I'm running low on colors, but I can't leave the house, so. But again, they sell these at Michael's. I think they might sell them at Joann's too. They're made by Folk Art. They're called Color Shift, and they're transparent, metallic, and they change color slightly. So it's basically like unicorn magic in a bottle. So let's try the green one. Again, I'm using my gel plate as my palette, because then if I have any paint left over, I just leave it on there and it's ready the next time I use my gel plate. So I have some green and metallic bronze on there, I think. So I just added a little bit. Sometimes you pull up the scoobers that are on your gel plate. So we'll pull those off. And then one other thing I sometimes do is I like to add little splashes afterwards. So again, you want your paint pretty fluid. I'm going to use that Filbert because it has lots of little bristles sticking out. How I do my splatters is I have a regular brush on the bottom. The brush that has paint on it is always on top. If you do it the other way, you are going to get paint in your face. So paint on top, and this is making a really fine, you may not even be able to see it on camera, but it's making a little fine mist of dots, which is what I like. Now if I load my brush up, I was holding it this way before. If I turn it on the side, it's going to give me a different pattern. It's actually finer. Depending on the brush, sometimes you can get a lot bigger dots or smaller dots. So now I know this brush gives me lots of these fine little dots, which is what I like. The other thing I always pay attention to is the closer you hold it, the more focused the dots are. So for example, if I wanted to put dots right there, I would just come here and I'd put dots there. Whereas if I want dots kind of all over, I'm a little higher up. I'm say 4 to 6 inches away from my paper. And then it's giving me just a little smattering of dots everywhere. So you can control it that way too. That looks cool to me. And you can see some of the places where the paper was still wet, it's the paint is sinking in more. But other places where it was dry, it's sitting on top. So this one I'm going to hit real quick with the heat gun just because I want to flip the page. And there's little dots. I want to make sure they're dry because I like this page. Alright, so let's do one more. The one with the first writing I did that was really large. And now I'm going to use some of the purple Color Shift. Oh, and now I'm picking up lots of goobers off of my gel plate. So I may be letting this one dry, and grabbing some packing tape to pull up all of that stuff. But let's see what we get. See, I'm picking up a little bit of the green too, which looks really cool. To me, that's just enough. It's just a way to add another layer onto your collage pages. And so this is just, now you have some to look through anytime you want to work on a collage piece. So I still like that one. I need to make a note to look up hieroglyphics so that I can add some of those to my work. I'm just looking around real quick to see if I had anything else I wanted to show you today. I don't think I do right now, but I do have a new book coming, so I'm excited to show you that. It's supposed to be here tomorrow, so our next video I will show you my new book. It's all about a master class with all the great artists through history. So it's all the little things we can learn from each artist. So it should be really cool. So I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you all next time. Happy arting!